fruit of my faith journey I never imagined I would gain: seeing things. No, not seeing things like, hey, look, a beautiful scenery, or hey, that person is angry. No, this kind of seeing things is insight, perception, and wisdom, all wrapped into one word: discernment. Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Geist, and welcome to Anything Goes, A Journey Home. So glad that you decided to join me today on this journey. I believe it was my weakest spiritual gift: discernment. The ability to see people beyond just being bad and good, and the ability to see problems and situations beyond what they appear. Definitely something I was lacking. After my life changed and went through a very spiritually and frankly physically shattering experience in 2022, I really had to wrestle with the projection of my feelings and opinions on others, which was lacking in discernment. I also had to wrestle with what was discernment and what wasn't. Because of this experience, I really saw Christians and Christianity in a whole new light, and it definitely woke me up to this reality quickly. It especially woke me up to my sense of discernment, or lack thereof. Let's be clear though, discernment is but a part of a greater, more complex word: wisdom. I wish I had time to talk about it in depth and about all of what wisdom included. Timothy and Kathy Keller wrote a wonderful devotion called God's Wisdom for Navigating Life, a year of daily devotions in the book of Proverbs, which I will make a copy of the link so that you can go and find it quickly and buy it if you'd like to. Also, I'll include a Bible app link to a version of this testimony and devotional in the Bible app for you to also follow along with. They talk about a lot of aspects of wisdom at length, and I was very intrigued by the concept of discernment. Another way of saying discernment is insight. Discernment or insight is to notice distinctions where others see only a blur. Like, if you were to play classical music for me, I will find new ways to get excited about the piece that I'm listening to because I hear and listen to music very critically and insightfully and very naturally. For others, it may be dance, sports, finance, law. I think you get the picture. We all have a specific passion or talent that enables us to be discerning and insightful without really having to try. But what I'm talking about when using discernment and insight in the context of our journey of living, we are talking about using this skill in daily living and relationships. In other words, seeing multiple opinions and courses of actions versus only seeing one or two. This is also being able to see the dimensions of people's character and motives when they are making their decisions. Truthfully, I think most of us humans suck at discerning and being insightful in our daily lives. I also, speaking from experience, think pastors and churches are notorious for struggling with this as well. Because of our natural sinful tendencies, and for pastors especially, it's far easier to paint people in black and white, putting people into good and bad categories, or defining them and their choices as right and wrong, leaving out perhaps the most challenging part of the human existence, which is discerning what aspect of right and wrong their decision-making has been. Or is the right result the good, the better, or the best result we could have hoped for? Is the wrong result the good, the better, or the best outcome we could have hoped for? The human experience is vastly complicated, and the only person that I know of is God, who can clearly define right and wrong in black and white terms and in His Word. When I see humans trying to do it, I see us failing on a massive scale. So let's run a few examples of what discerning might look like. Take my most recent experience with church hurt from season 3, episode 2. If the church leadership had been discerning, they would have realized that this kind of decision would have negative consequences. For example, its impact would have been far beyond me. It affected my wife, it affected my kids. The result was we had to move for a new job, away from family, which hurt not just me, but my family as well. And this extended family and some of my friends now will actively choose not to attend this church and would rather go anywhere else but there. That's a consequence that perhaps they didn't discern. Similarly, they could have discerned it, and perhaps they decided that it was worth the risk, which begs the question, was it the right or wrong decision? Well, depends on the perspective. If it's them, I would say, yeah, for them it was the right decision. For me, no, it wasn't the right decision. I lost my job, which I get. It happens all the time. And I'm truthfully over it at this point. But I'm making a point on a bigger scale, which is discerning all the consequences before we make a decision, or discerning whether or not the decision, good, bad, right, or wrong, the result is the best that it could possibly be with all things considered. Now, what if I had been discerning? Which, if I'm being frank, I was not very discerning in that whole scenario, because I was actually actively being taught in that moment and in that season of life how to be discerning going forward. If I had actually been discerning, I would have taken into account that my leadership had actually had a consistent history of character with this kind of dismissing individuals because of conflict. That the church itself had a history of senior pastors and pastors of any kind being cycled through because of poor character and scandals of various kinds. But we can also be discerning with finances. The idea that buying something now because it's on sale, just because it's on sale, isn't the most discerning type of decision making we could make. But perhaps taking into account that, for example, I'm a musician, and buying this instrument or recording tool for my job will actually improve my workflow and my creative process, as well as create opportunities for success and client acquisition for further work, while also being a tax write-off because it's used for my business. I would say that's a little bit more discerning than the latter. But let's blow it up. Imagine taking this kind of responsibility and discernment to a grander scale, like running a nation. Whether we disagree or like the current government or not, or previous iterations, is irrelevant. Big government moves slow because there are so many opinions and thoughts and insights and discernments being given in the context of this greater authority. And before all of that actual decision making is made, all of that input is received. Now, truthfully, this is a terrible analogy because there are other factors at play that afford leaders the ability to veto discernment for his own opinion. Or there are powers in play that dictate terms based on financial contribution that ultimately throw discernment out the window. The same is true of church leadership, especially big church. Fun fact, in Fortune 500 companies, CEOs, CFOs, and the like are all afraid of the board. Why? Because they are the authority, and the CEOs and the CFOs are subject to that authority. And they could lose their job if the board, and truthfully, the shareholders, are not happy with their performance. In some businesses, this isn't always the case. In big churches, this isn't always the case. Oftentimes, leadership in both environments are on the elder board or board of trustees as well, creating a scenario much like some governments where they could manipulate the board or simply be a voice of singular opposition to a unanimous voting situation. In essence, blowing to pieces the whole point of an elder board and a board of trustees being placed there to give discernment an opportunity and a chance. But instead, when a pastor or a CEO and CFO are on the board, ultimately, they have the opportunity to blow discernment out of the water for personal preference and their own personal opinion. Frankly, a dangerous place for any organization to be. At its very basic, discernment needs to be effortless for us. Effortless, that's a hard word. But the other thing that discernment needs to be is not time consuming. The only way that this can happen is if we are willing to practice discernment. One of the best ways that we can do that is looking back at our lives at certain decision making and discerning what possible outcomes could have resulted of our decision making, whether it was a scenario or with a relationship or with a job or whatever the scenario might be. And getting to the point where it is a common practice for us that we get to the point where it's so comfortable a process for us that we could come down to 1 or 2 results, or we could come to the place where we get to 5, 6, 7, or 8 results rather quickly. The most important thing we need to know about discerning is that it's not about us. Discernment requires of us the willingness to set aside our own ego and our own pride to see somebody else's perspective and perhaps take into account factors of a person's character or factors of a situation that we wouldn't otherwise focus on because we're too focused on ourselves. Because take for my situation as an example, I could have just as easily said, I did the right thing. I knew what I was doing was right. I could have done all of these host of things right, and I know all these other things, and I didn't do them, and I did the right thing, and so I'm justified. And I am. You kind of see where this starts falling apart. It's a whole lot of me, and not a whole lot of discerning all of the factors that go into the scenario or relationship or individual that I'm dealing with or that I'm going through. The faster and more effortless it becomes for us to discern things, and the less time-consuming that it becomes, it affords us the ability to avoid the trap of becoming indecisive and coming to conclusions about scenarios, relationships, or people. And the more we practice it, the more humble we become, and the less we interact with pride. For my situation, as I learned what discerning actually looks like and practiced it, and then going forward after, frankly, a painful experience, it has only continued to inform and give me a greater trust in the Holy Spirit to provide me with discernment regardless of the circumstance that I find myself in. I want you to take a moment in your life and ask yourself a couple of questions. Yes, I want you to do something. Am I seeing new distinctions that I didn't see before? Are we seeing new information, new perspectives on an individual, a relationship that maybe perhaps we didn't see before because we were being actively hurt or actively going through the situation and we couldn't see it? Sometimes these are really the hardest moments to engage with discernment in our daily lives, when we're actively going through hurt. But this is where the power of reflection comes in, examining and discerning what could have happened differently, and taking these lessons learned and applying them to future situations is a method of practicing and applying discernment on our journey of life. My name is Andrew Geist, and this is Anything Goes, A Journey Home. Thanks for listening and watching the podcast today, for liking, sharing, smashing those buttons. If you are watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't forget to subscribe. Click the bell so you can get notifications every time I take a journey home. You can also go to aguysproduction.com to connect with me there. You'll also find all of previous seasons and episodes of this podcast at ajourneyhome.blog. Don't forget to check out the socials below in the show notes, as well as links to my merch store and more. Be kind to each other, show faith, love, and hope to those who need it. Have a great week. I'm going home.